Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We grab fascinating sources, pull out the key insights, all for you. And today, we're diving into something that might just fundamentally shift how you think about your own health.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
talking about how deeply your social life, your connections, even just your sense of belonging, how all that is really tied into your physical well-being.
Hmm.
It's way more biological, more evolutionarily baked in than I think most of us really grasp.
That's so true. And for a long time, discussions around stress and health, they've been kind of vague, haven't they?
Yeah, a bit of a broad brush. It led to some confusing, sometimes contradictory findings in the research.
Exactly.
But our mission today is to introduce you to a newer, much clearer framework
Yeah.
that kind of ties this whole picture together.
That's right. We're going to be exploring social safety theory, or SST. And this theory offers, well, a really groundbreaking view. It's biologically grounded, it's informed by evolution, and it explains how your social experiences fundamentally shape not just your day-to-day mood, but also how you age and even how long you might live.
Wow. And our main source for this deep dive, it's a big review article from Health Psychology Review, right? Came out just last year, 2023. George M. Slavich and his colleagues.
That's the one. They really aim to cut through that noise, bring some clarity where, frankly, it was needed because of all those inconsistencies you mentioned.
So bottom line for you listening, we're here to unpack why your brain and your immune system react to social cues the way they do and what that actually means for your health down the line.
Let's do it.
So maybe start with the history a bit. How did we used to think about this link between, social life and biology? Where did the old theories kind of miss the mark?
Well, the traditional stress theories, they often made these big assumptions, right, about how social stuff might affect our biology, but often without a solid evolutionary basis.
Oh.
And that led to, well, conceptual problems, a lack of real agreement in the field. I mean, think about it. Lots of studies just use these super general stressor exposure metrics.
Like a checklist of bad things.
Sort of, yeah. Trying to boil down someone's incredibly complex social life into, like, one number, it was just insufficient. Like, trying to understand a whole ecosystem by just counting the trees.
Right. You miss all the connections. So how does social safety theory, SST, change that whole approach? What's the big shift?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. SST basically flips the script. Instead of just looking at effects and guessing the causes, it starts with something way more fundamental.
Okay.
The primary goal and the regulatory logic of the human brain and the immune system itself. From an evolutionary standpoint, that goal is super clear. Maximize survival and reproductive success.
Okay, makes sense. Survival first.
Exactly. So by starting there, SST can actually predict which kinds of social situations these systems should be most sensitive to, which ones they should react to most strongly. It's a move from just observing psychology to understanding the deep biology underneath.
So it's almost like our brain and immune system evolved together to act like a sixth sense, specifically tuned to the social world, constantly scanning for cues. Is that related to anticipating things?
Precisely. Our bodies are incredibly proactive, not just reactive. Think about the concept of allostasis.
Allostasis.
Yeah.
Right, maintaining stability through change.
Exactly. It's your body's amazing ability to anticipate needs and shift resources around to keep things balanced, even when the environment is changing and threatening. It's not just waiting for a hit. It's constantly adjusting, even predicting potential threats.
And the immune system is key to that.
Absolutely crucial. It acts like that sixth sense, constantly monitoring for danger. And importantly, it doesn't just react to an injury after it happens. It mounts anticipatory responses.
So it gets ready ahead of time.
Yeah, based on past experiences or current cues that signal potential danger. This preemptive action gives a huge survival advantage. Imagine, an ancestor getting into a fight, maybe gets a cut. The immune system starts ramping up defenses against infection before the wound even gets dirty. It anticipates the likely consequence.
That's incredible. So our bodies are, in a way, preparing for a physical fight, even if the threat today is just, I don't know, a harsh email or feeling excluded. How does that message get sent biologically?
It's this really intricate communication network. They call it the biobehavioral response to social threat. It involves constant chatter between the brain's social networks.
Like the amygdala for fear.
Exactly, the amygdala, but also areas involved in understanding others' minds, empathy, the mirror neuron system, all talking to your peripheral immune system out in the body.
And how do they talk? What are the pathways?
Major pathways like your sympathetic nervous system, the SNS, your fight or flight, and the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is your main hormone hormonal stress response system.
Yeah.
Now, when these get activated by perceived social threats, the SNS pumps out chemicals like adrenaline, noradrenaline.
The stress hormones.
Right. And here's the critical part. Those chemicals actually dial down your antiviral genes, but they crank up your pro-inflammatory genes.
Whoa, wait. So feeling socially threatened makes you less able to fight viruses, but more prone to inflammation.
In essence, yes. From an evolutionary perspective, the body's prioritizing. It's preparing for a potential physical wound or infection that might historically follow social conflict, rather than focusing resources on, say, fighting off a cold virus.
So the real punchline here is that this whole integrated threat response, it gets triggered most strongly by social situations that, way back in our evolutionary history, signaled a real risk of physical danger.
That's it, exactly. For our ancestors, things like social conflict, aggression, being pushed down the social ladder, getting kicked out of the group,
Rejection, isolation.
all of it. These situations directly up the risk of getting hurt, or worse. And today, those same kinds of social situations are consistently linked in research to increased inflammatory activity in our bodies.
And that chronic inflammation, that's the link to long-term problems.
That's the proposed mechanism. Chronic inflammation is implicated in so many conditions: depression, heart disease, even neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's. The absolute core idea of SST is that what really matters for your health isn't just the objective situation, but the extent to which you personally appraise it as lacking social safety and possessing social threat.
Your perception is key. And this all comes together in the three main tenets of social safety theory, right? They kind of lay out the core message.
They do. They're like the fundamental pillars. Okay, so tenet 1. Humans evolved a fundamental basic drive to seek out and foster social safety. We inherently want to build and keep friendly social bonds, especially with people we see as part of our in-group.
Makes sense. We're social creatures.
Then, tenet 2. Social safety is good for us. It's beneficial for health, for behavior across the board. Feeling safe socially contributes to all sorts of positive outcomes, including living longer.
Okay, safety is protective.
And tenet 3. The flip side, social threat is harmful. Experiences that signal threat are linked to a whole range of negative health outcomes, including increased risk of mortality.
Harmful physically, not just mentally.
Right.
Wow, okay, that lays it out clearly. Now, SST also helps us kind of dissect these social experiences more precisely, doesn't it? Using three distinct concepts or layers.
That's right. It helps differentiate between sort of the objective situation, your subjective feeling about it, and your underlying beliefs.
All right, let's break those down. First layer.
First, you have socially safe and socially threatening situations. These are the observable characteristics of what's happening around you socially.
Give me some examples.
Okay, so safe situations might be things like feeling accepted, being included, having predictability in your relationships, like, being welcomed into a team, or just having friends you can count on.
Got it. And threatening.
Threatening situations involve things like conflict, arguments, rejection, social exclusion, unpredictability, like a fight with a partner, or being suddenly ostracized at work. And importantly, even things that don't seem directly social on the surface, like, say, bombing an exam or losing your job, they can become socially threatening because of the potential fallout, how others might judge you, the impact on your relationships, your status.
Right, the social consequences.
Okay.
That's the situation itself. What's the second layer?
The second is perceived social safety and social threat. This is your personal, individual appraisal of that situation. It's obviously influenced by reality, but it's also separate.
How so?
Well, take an ambiguous comment, like someone says, "What happened to you?" One person might hear that as genuine concern, perceiving safety. Another person, maybe based on past experiences, might hear it as criticism or judgment, perceiving threat.
So same words, different perception, different biological reaction.
Exactly. And this individual appraisal is critical because that's what directly influences the biological cascade we talked about. This is conceptualized as your acute, like, right in this moment feeling.
Okay. Situation, perception. And a third layer sounds deeper. Social safety schemas, like mental blueprints.
That's a great way to put it. Social safety schemas are your brain's deep-seated Cognitive representations, they're more like personality traits, stable patterns built up over your lifetime from all your social experiences and the messages you internalized.
What kinds of beliefs are we talking about?
They fall into three buckets: social self-schemas, beliefs about you, like am I lovable, do I belong, can I cope with social challenges?
Mm-hmm.
Then social world schemas, your general view of other people. Are they generally trustworthy and friendly or hostile and unreliable?
Okay, self and others.
And social future schemas. What do you expect down the line? Do you anticipate connection or isolation? Stability or social danger?
And crucially, you can feel both safety and threat at the same time. It's not always one or the other.
Definitely not. Think about getting constructive criticism from a boss or mentor. There's an element of evaluation, which can feel threatening, but it might be delivered within a supportive relationship, which feels safe. Most real-life social interactions are complex like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, this leads us to a really critical idea you mentioned earlier, evolutionary mismatch.
Yes.
Today, disagreements are less likely to end in physical violence, thankfully, but our bodies still react with those ancient responses like inflammation. And you said even imagined threats can do this.
That's the core of the mismatch issue. In our modern world, chronic or just frequent experiences of social threat, and yes, even just imagining them, like replaying an argument in your head or constantly worrying about being judged.
We all do that sometimes.
Right. Well, doing that can keep activating these neural and immune threat responses over and over. And that leads to chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation.
And that's the danger long term.
That's the danger. Because that chronic inflammation significantly bumps up your risk for all those chronic diseases we talked about. It seems to accelerate biological aging, and it's linked to earlier mortality. Our biology just hasn't had time to adapt to how quickly our social environments have changed.
It sounds like it can trap you in a negative loop, a kind of vicious cycle.
It absolutely can become one. Chronic social threat can actually change your biology, for instance. It can make your body less sensitive to cortisol, the hormone that's supposed to calm inflammation.
The brakes don't work as well.
Exactly,
Okay.
leading to more persistent inflammation. And then you get these feedback loops. If you have negative social safety schemas, like you deeply believe people always reject me, that belief might actually lead you to behave in ways that cause more social friction or withdrawal.
Which then confirms your belief.
Precisely. It reinforces the negative schema, keeps the biological threat response going, and it's really hard to break out of that cycle.
Wow. Okay, let's zoom out again. Connecting this to the big picture, SST seems like a really powerful way to understand how these dynamics play out across our whole lives, especially during certain key periods, these sensitive periods in development.
Yes, development is critical. Those sensitive windows are times when our biology is particularly responsive to social input. Think about early life, even prenatal development, infancy, childhood. Stress during these times can literally program your stress response systems, like the HPA axis.
Yeah.
Really threatening childhood experiences can kind of lay down a blueprint for what scientists call a defensive phenotype.
Meaning you're basically wired for danger.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Your body and brain are sort of primed to be on high alert, constantly scanning for threats. Now, ancestrally, if you grew up in a genuinely dangerous place, that might have been adaptive, right? Kept you alive.
Sure.
But in a relatively safe modern environment, that constant hypervigilance, that chronic biological stress response can lead to major long-term health problems.
And puberty sounds like another really critical time, especially with how important social standing becomes for teenagers.
Hugely important. During puberty, the brain circuits dealing with social information become incredibly sensitive to social cues, acceptance, rejection status. We also see big changes in systems like the oxytocin system.
Oxytocin, the bonding hormone?
Yeah, it's involved in social affiliation, trust, and it can actually help buffer or downregulate stress reactivity. But its function is really malleable, really shaped by experiences during adolescence. And the immune system is changing too. Inflammation and social experiences seem to kind of co-regulate each other during this time.
Meaning they influence each other back and forth.
Exactly. It's a dynamic interplay with really significant implications for health trajectories into adulthood.
So it's not just individual development. SST also helps us understand the impact of the broader social context, right? Culture, institutions. Our experiences aren't just personal. They're shaped by these larger social circles we live in.
Absolutely. We're talking family, school, neighborhood, the wider society, even global events. Social institutions, governments, economic systems, educational systems, they all create norms, expectations, structures.
And these can either promote safety or create threat.
Precisely. They can foster safety through things like predictability, fairness, inclusion, or they can contribute to threat through things like systemic racism, discrimination, economic instability. The source gives examples.
Like what?
Like how homophily, the tendency to associate with similar others, can affect minority managers in big companies, potentially limiting their support networks, or how structural factors like inadequate social assistance for poor communities after a disaster like Hurricane Katrina directly impacted people's sense of safety and their health outcomes.
And this idea of prediction errors seems really relevant here, especially when institutions fail us.
It really is. When the reality you experience doesn't match the expectations set by institutions, maybe promises aren't kept, systems seem unfair, or like during the pandemic when everything felt unpredictable.
Yeah, that was rough.
That mismatch, that violation of expectation, can be a potent source of social threat. It contributes to that feeling of being unsafe and increases allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear on your body from chronic stress.
Which brings us to a really heavy but crucial question. How does SST help explain health disparities between different groups?
Yeah, this is vital. SST provides a clear biological framework for understanding why oppression, marginalization, and discrimination, things like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, are so damaging to health.
Because they are profound forms of social threat.
Exactly. They represent chronic, pervasive social threat that relentlessly activates that harmful biobehavioral response, that inflammation cascade we've been talking about.
And the research backs this up.
Consistently, study after study links experiences of discrimination to worse mental and physical health in marginalized groups. For example, there are strong links between racial discrimination and higher rates of hypertension, even certain cancers like breast cancer. We see huge health disparities affecting LGBTQ+ populations.
It's not just in their head, it's biological.
It's deeply biological, and the theory also highlights the importance of intersectionality.
Meaning how different aspects of identity combine.
Right, how having multiple marginalized identities, race, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, disability, can create unique and often compounded experiences of social threat. Think about the specific threats faced by, say, a Black transgender woman, which are different from those faced by a white gay man or a Black cisgender man. These intersections really matter for health.
That's incredibly important to understand. So beyond these big societal factors in development, are there other, maybe more individual or situational things that modify how social safety or threat affects us? The paper mentioned a few surprising ones.
Yeah, it's a complex web. A couple that really stood out were your childhood microbial environment.
Microbes, like dirt.
Kind of, yeah. The idea still being researched is that growing up in, say, a very sanitized urban setting versus a more microbe-rich rural or farm environment might actually train your immune system differently. Well, maybe exposure to a wider range of harmless microbes early on helps the immune system learn to regulate inflammation more effectively later in life, potentially making you less reactive to social stressors. Less hygienic might actually be healthier in this specific way.
Wow, okay, my mind is slightly blown. What else? Sleep.
Sleep is huge. We know social threats disrupt sleep, but then poor sleep itself ramps up inflammation, so you get this nasty feedback loop. Threat messes with sleep, bad sleep increases inflammation, and that inflammation can actually make you perceive the social world as more threatening.
It just spirals.
They can, yeah. And then there are other factors too, like diet, high-fat diets, and obesity are linked to inflammation. Genetics play a role. Certain gene variations might make some people's biology more or less sensitive to social signals. Personality traits matter. How extroverted or neurotic you are influences your social interactions and stress responses. Even things like non-suicidal self-injury and SSI.
How does that fit in?
Well, social threats are often triggers for NSSI, but the act of self-injury itself can also increase inflammation, which might then, paradoxically, heighten the person's sense of social threat. It's all interconnected.
It really paints a picture of how complex this is. But the flip side is, understanding SST isn't just about the negative, right? It also really emphasizes how powerful social safety is as a buffer.
Absolutely critical point. That's the hope inherent in the theory. Social support, feeling connected, feeling safe, these things can powerfully protect against the damaging health effects of stressors like discrimination. Safety is medicine.
So this leads to thinking about interventions. If we know safety is protective and threat is harmful, how do we use this knowledge? Slavich talks about these social safety circles.
Yeah, it's a nice visual. It means we can intervene at multiple levels to try and boost social safety and reduce social threat.
Okay, like at the individual level.
Right. So, tailored therapies. For instance, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, could be adapted to specifically challenge those negative social safety schemas, those "I'm unlovable" or "people are hostile" beliefs.
Hmm.
And it could help people develop behaviors that actually foster better social connections. The source also mentions other promising individual approaches like mindfulness practices or forgiveness interventions.
Makes sense. What about the next circle out? Family and school.
Yeah, huge potential there. Things like training parents in more nurturing techniques, programs to improve family cohesion, creating identity safety in school so all kids feel they belong.
Reducing bullying, fostering connection.
Exactly. Social belonging interventions in schools have shown real promise in reducing conflict and improving well-being.
And then the biggest circles, community and society.
That's where we need broader efforts. Working to reduce systemic bias and discrimination, preventing bullying on a larger scale, designing communities and policies that intentionally promote social connection and empathy. It's about changing the environment, not just the individual.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway for you, our listener? The real promise here?
I think the promise of social safety theory is huge. It really moves us past just talking vaguely about stress. It gives us specific biological pathways, specific psychological mechanisms, and concrete social factors to target. It offers a much more precise roadmap for preventing disease and promoting health.
It really does. This deep dive into SST, it just powerfully underlined how tangled up our social lives are with our biology. It's not just feelings, it's physiology.
Deeply physiological.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on as you go about your day. How could you actively, consciously cultivate a bit more social safety in your own life? What small steps could you take, maybe even today, to foster more connection, to reduce perceived threat, both for yourself and maybe for the people around you? Because really understanding this connection, acting on it, that feels like a vital step towards not just our own health, but maybe towards reducing health disparities and building a healthier society for everyone.